Hello everybody and welcome back to LMM. And if you're enjoying what you're seeing on the channel at the moment, how about giving this video a like and maybe subscribing to the channel to help us grow, and perhaps even check out our Patreon. Today I'm here at the Whitwell and Reepham Railway for the Diesel Gala, starring the Ruston 48, the Ruston 88 Pockety, the Fowler from the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway, and one other. We were meant to be having the North British, but that broke. So we've now got that. So it carries a headboard on it saying that honk honk, I'm a diesel. So it is a diesel gala with an imposter, because this in truth is day 2. Because yesterday, well, everything went wrong. On the Saturday, everything had started so well, with my Ruston 48 pulling both the first passenger trains of the gala and its first ever public trains, which was an amazing honour. And for me, it was exceedingly fun to be able to drive the thing somewhere else and take it and the train for a trundle along the Whitwell and Reepham. Because my Loco isn't fitted with directional lights, every time we got to the other end of the line, we had to deploy a red tail lamp. And because I don't have lamp brackets, it was just hung over the rear drawbar like that. And then, once the second man had climbed back aboard the locomotive, we could return back along the line. Once we'd run the opening 2 trains of the gala, it was Topockety's time to shine, taking the freight out. And as we waited for instructions on our next movement, I noticed there was an awful lot of water dribbling out from underneath the Ruston 48, which was deeply concerning. I figured that soon we were going to be shunted into a siding and I could take a closer look at it without fouling up the entire timetable. But that movement, of course, couldn't take place until Topockety had returned. And with the 88 returning with the freight, I was given permission to propel into the head shunt, where I would uncouple from the brake fan and leave that for the next locomotive, whereas I could then move into a siding. But first I had to wait for the North British to move out of the way, because that's where I was going to be sitting. As the North British and the Fowler that was parked behind it moved clear, I could get the 48 into the siding and start having a look to exactly what had happened to the locomotive and where all this water was coming from. And as I looked at the engine, I was passed by the Fowler, which was now going on the brake van to be the motive power for the passenger services. The North British's first train of the Gala and its first train in the public eye since overhaul was going to be the freight, and for that, Topocity had to move clear. And whilst it was doing that, the Fowler pulled the brake van into the platform. And with Topocity out of the way, the North British could reverse down onto the freight and get ready to haul its first train in the public eye. Meanwhile, I had to radio the RO and let him know that 294266 was a failure. There was water pouring out from a hole in the radiator, and the water pump was letting more water out than actually circulating around the system. But the bad news didn't stop there, because the North British had lost all oil pressure, and on investigation it was found that the forward oil seal on the main crank had failed, which put that out of action as well. The Fowler, however, continued to fly the flag for the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway and diesel kind everywhere, and carried on without any bother. Losing two of the star locomotives during the opening morning of a weekend gala was a disaster, and hugely disappointing for all those who'd been involved in the North British locomotives restoration. What was particularly annoying for both of us was that the North British and the Ruston 48 had both been used in the pre-gala shunt. They'd both been busy on the Friday before the gala, moving stock around the railway so everything would be ready for Saturday morning, and both of them performed flawlessly, which made it all the more sickening. There'd been no faults on either until the gala actually started. This movement was particularly exciting because, to my knowledge, the Ruston had never moved a Mark I before, and it just looked so silly being dwarfed by the carriage. The North British had no chance of running for the rest of the event, needing the engine to be stripped down again. However, if I could disappear and find some radiator sealant and some waterproof grease for my water pump, there was a chance that 294266 might do something by the end of the gala. But as I screamed off in the Mini to go and find the required supplies, it left the gala in the hands of the 88 and the Fowler. Having flown around the Norfolk countryside to find the required supplies, I returned to the railway and effected a repair on the little Ruston in time to take the last 5 trains of the day, which I was absolutely overjoyed with. She was down, but not out. Now, I can't express to you in words alone the sheer feeling of euphoria of getting the Ruston back into service. It had been hugely embarrassing for it to fail on me, but to get it back and to get it running trains to close the first day of the Gala was absolutely spectacular, and I was so pleased to have the little machine doing what it was meant to do and to be able to haul trains again, and so many of you lovely people who'd come along to see it. However, all wasn't brilliant. Every time I came back into the platform, I had to top the radiator back up with water, add more waterproof grease to the water pump, and put another patch on the radiator. Every time we got one to seal, another hole would open up in the header. In all, I applied 4 new patches, and by the time the 5th one opened up at the end of the day, I decided that we had to do something about this. If only there was a spare Ruston kicking about that had a radiator that it wasn't using. The radiator, so 303's radiator over there, we've tested that and it holds water better than this one does. So now the plan is to take the front cowling off, the whole nose of it off, to expose the radiator so we can do a swap tonight with the hope that it will run tomorrow. Locomotive ownership is wonderful. You know those things where you have this really good idea of a job and you think, this won't take too long. It's 7 o'clock in the evening, the radiator is off, the front cowling's off, and now all we need to do to bring this into service for tomorrow is to get the scrap radiator from 303, assume that holds water, and install it on this. Is everyone having a really good time? Yes! Yeah. They hate me. Seeing my locomotive without the front on would be distressing enough if it was at its home railway, but as it was away on hire and meant to be the star, it was particularly upsetting, and a sight that I'd not seen before, nor I want to see again. But after many hours of hard work, we managed to get the radiator from 303 to fit, and at this point I must give a massive shout out to Nick, Rob and Dan, who went above and beyond and proved themselves to be proper good mates to get this thing back together again. We also replaced the grill onto the inside of the top cowling because it annoyed me being on the outside. And eventually, at 10 o'clock at night, we finished putting the thing back together again, and it now held water. Dawn broke with the honorary diesel being started up and made ready for service. It was decided that having Agecroft out would allow us to continue with the timetable and not have to make any changes. And so from this moment forward, this is a diesel. Our repairs on Sir William appeared to be holding, and the locomotive was able to operate the first 2 trains of the second day of the Gala without incident. The water pump did keep dribbling, but as long as I kept putting more waterproof grease in, it would seal up for a run or 2. It was incredible to think that the radiator that had sat on 303 for 39 years in a scrapyard was back in active service without anything being done to it. Absolutely mind-blowing. And frankly, also hugely relieving to have the thing operating without any further issues. And all too soon, it was time for Topockety's first train of the day. and whilst the freight was out, the Fowler was able to move over to relieve me on the passenger service. The next workings of the freight were going to be undertaken by honorary diesel Agecroft number 3, which, in spirit of the event, had been adorned with modern-styled lamps, a late BR crest on the side of it, a headboard reminding everybody that it was pretending to be a diesel, and it was carrying the failed North British's running number on the other side as well. And after that had returned back to the yard, it was time to do another loco swap.
So the next movement today is I'm taking that. So it's a freight train. The tanker's got about 20 tons of water in it, plus a ballast hopper, which means this train is in excess of 50 tons. Now 50 tons is probably the biggest train I've ever hauled with it, and I'm not nervous at all.
Before we could go out on the main line, however, we had to pull forward to shunt release to Pockety, which was currently sitting behind us. And then, once that was out of the way, we could set back with the little Ruston 48 and then head out on the main line, which was something that I was a tad nervous about. It's well documented that a Ruston 48 will move 100 tons on the level, but as soon as you start going up a gradient, this rapidly decreases, and the gradient coming up around the shed is quite steep. And so we had discussed the possibility of a rescue engine having to come and drag us up the hill if it all went south. As we headed out onto the main line, it was exciting to think that this was exactly the kind of train that the Ruston had been designed to handle. A few wagons being moved along a short branch line or around a yard. This was exactly what it was meant to do. With us out the way, the next move was for Agecroft to clear the head shunt. And with the pseudo diesel out of the way, it was time for us to return. Having successfully completed our turn with the freight and surprised everybody at the railway with the grunt of the little machine, it was time for us to come off and sit in the loop as Topocity headed off with the passenger service. And with us out the way, Topocity could head off with the passenger service. And once Topocity had returned, it was time for a change of engines all round, starting off with the Fowler coming out to pick up the goods. The other engine swap was that Agecroft, the pseudo-diesel, was going out on the passenger service. And once the diesel imposter had made its way back into the platform and another locomotive swap take place, it was time for the Fowler to head out with the freight. With the Fowler and the freight train back in the siding, the day was starting to wind down and come to an end, which meant it was time for the Ruston 48 to be called on again to go and haul the last few trains to the Gala. It had been a real honour to not only haul the opening trains, but to haul the closing trains as well. So the little machine trundled itself along the line to switch over to the platform road to pick up the brake van for the last few movements. All too soon, it was the end of the day, which marked the end of the Gala. And all that remained to do was to put the locomotives and shunt some of the stock away, and then we could sit back and reflect on the weekend that was. This weekend has not been without its challenges, but I've loved all of it. Well, certainly all of it once we got that thing working. There was great embarrassment yesterday and great disappointment, but today it's been basically flawless, with various bits borrowed from the other one. So having that back working trains has been glorious. So a massive great thank you to the Whitwell and Reepham Railway for inviting me and that along for the Gala. If you want more information, there's a link to their website in the video description. And with that, we've just got to finish off doing some shunting. I've got to push these wagons back over there, then we can power off and go home. The big thing is though that this isn't going back to the mid-Suffolk, not for a few months, so it may well be in service here for the next certain weekends and other operational things and doing shunting. And most importantly, on the 10th of August, we're going to be doing an LMM day. So there'll be driver experiences for you guys on this, for doing driving for a tenner, and also it'll be doing brake van rides as well. So come along, see it, and I'll be bringing up a load of the fleet. So come along, see us then, because it's not going home quite yet, and then it goes back home for September, the first weekend of September, the first Sunday of September. It's back at the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway for our Everything Goes Gala. So with that, thank you all for watching. I hope you've enjoyed seeing this and seeing it actually do something. I've owned it for longer than I've been doing the channel. It's the first time we've actually done something with it. So that's great, and thank you to all of you guys who came along and said hello, especially those of you who came and were part of its first ever train. With that, time to do some shunting. So see you later, guys. Ta-ra.